All right, President Perry, thanks for coming to the Writing Center for the interview for EIU Writes, and we're just going to ask you a few questions about writing and writing at EIU. So,
Great, my pleasure to be here.
thank you.
Okay, President Perry, you just told us that you were a mathematician. That was
Right.
kind of one of my first questions was, what was your professional background before you came to Eastern in 2007, and what kinds of writing did you have to do before you became president?
Right. Well, I was at another university for 36 years, and I went through the ranks in mathematics, and then I got into administration. So I wrote mathematical research papers. I wrote some textbooks, a handbook, and then I started writing memos and plans, those kind of administrative things that you do. So professionally, that's what almost all of my writing has been. I've served on some boards, for nonprofits, and so occasionally in positions there, I would have to write things. Those are more planning documents, or sometimes letters to constituencies.
Okay. Since you've been here at Eastern, have you developed any new kinds of writing projects that you didn't do before? I know you've got a newsletter that I've seen on the website.
Well, of course, there are many ways to reach different constituencies, and I've been more in contact with alumni here than I had been in my previous position. So using electronic ways to reach out there has been important. But also, I think emails to the campus community. I haven't done too many of those because I think they can create fatigue. But I've tried to do those on an episodic basis so that they would remain effective. And so on the side, sort of hobby writing, and I've done some just poetry just for personal consumption, and some 575 haiku, and I find that's interesting because you have to be very spare. Every word counts, and oftentimes you have to really push your way through an emotion or something that's working on you at that particular time. So I find that satisfying as well.
Nice.
Well, one of my colleagues reminded me when you came to the English department meeting that you mentioned that you use writing in your math courses.
Right.
And a lot of people have this conception that math or the sciences, not much writing in them. So why do you use writing in your math classes, and what's the payoff?
Well, I think it's connected to integrative learning.
Right.
So one of the things I did in the past, in a linear algebra class I taught, was I asked the students to pick something in the world that was related to mathematics. Now this was an interesting experience because they didn't nothing sprung to mind. So I had to sort of prep, and I said, well, what about movies? And then, so I said, oh, well, A Beautiful Mind and Good Will Hunting and these kind of things. This kind of tells you about when I was doing this, right? And then I would mention maybe an article or two, maybe that had appeared in a newspaper or a magazine or something like that. So they started to get the drift and gradually built a list of things. So then I said, you can approach it from any point of view you want, but I want there to be somehow mathematics as maybe a generator.
Right.
Of the project,
Mm-hmm.
So they were all over the map. It was really great.
Mm-hmm.
And one I remember in particular was this engineering student wrote about A Beautiful Mind and was talking about actors having to portray people with mental illness, say. I mean, the sense being that you couldn't really do that. I mean, as an actor, you couldn't do that. And so this engineering intellectually dishonest for an actor to actually take that on, to portray someone. And that was interesting, because then you start to really get to talking about some interesting non-mathematical things.
Right.
About the arts, about acting, and so forth and so on. But then some others were connected, different kinds of writing. I mean, one person turned in a digital project, another person turned in a voice project, and so I allowed a lot of freedom there, and I started to see that there's a lot of creativity out there, and that mathematics sometimes can provide the spark for it. Now here, with integrative learning, I last fall when I taught linear algebra, developed some 3 projects, and students gave preferences, and they ended up being in a project group. And an outcome of that was then to write a reflective paper on connections that this made for them with maybe the career they had planned or other courses they had taken, so forth and so on. And the point is that if you're going to relate mathematics to something else, you have to, mathematics has a language all its own. You all know, you've taken math, so you do a math homework, and it's one set of language. But now if you're going to talk about how that relates to maybe football head injuries or supply and demand, these kind of things, you have to interpolate that for your audience. You have to convert mathematical concepts to sort of plain English. And so that's a valid exercise, because I think that in all of our lives we're always interacting with multiple audiences. We're trying to make a connection one way or another. I mean, I think social networks give you examples of ways people are trying to connect and connecting. So having a common set of language and interactions is an important part of it. So I think the payoff is for people to see that mathematics does connect with the world, but it's like having an adapter. Like when you travel to Europe and you've got to have the special adapter and all that. It's learning how to do that, and if you can learn to do that with mathematics and something else, then I think you can start to make the connections between multiple fields. Yeah.
So the use of reflective pieces to really think about what one has learned or how it can be applied.
Right, and you can't, I don't think you can communicate it to someone unless you've really made it part of you.
Right.
And so that's why just in a mathematics course, sometimes a student will ask about, well, how do you do problem number 13? And I'll say, oh, well, state the problem. And then sometimes a student will go to the book. I said, no, wait a minute. Can you state the problem? Well, they hadn't been able to state the problem without looking at it. I said, well, until the problem's part of you, you can't begin to have a solution be part of you. So the first step is to be able to state the problem. And then I'll say, well, can you state the problem to another student? And it's more than just having memorized the statement of it. So there's a difference between, saying, find a rank 3 matrix that does such and so, to saying, well, I need to find a matrix that has this kind of structure, because then you're really starting to understand the problem statement.
Good. Thank you.
So you were talking about integrative learning and how you've kind of used that when you're teaching math. How do you think that writing instructors could use those same kind of principles in their writing classes?
Oh, well, of course, first of all, I have just huge respect for people who can teach writing, okay, because that's a very, very, very hard thing. But I think one thing you can do is say, give different assignments so that there's an understanding you're writing for a different audience each time. So you could say, for example, imagine you're writing, I don't know what the assignment might be, to a bunch of Chicago Bears fans on something, on winning, or just
about
whatever.
The Packers one.
Right, right, so something like that. Okay, that could be one assignment. And then another, you could say, well, imagine you're a CEO of a corporation and you're writing something to the people, or you're writing a speech and you're wanting to talk about teamwork to achieve a goal. And then you have different styles of writing, which will cause people to think, okay, well, who really is the audience? And I think that's one way to cause the students to think a lot about their writing.
And do you think in turn that will help students be more engaged with the world beyond college?
Well, I think it can, because see, if for example, and this is really a great conversation because I hadn't really thought about this in terms of teaching a math class. So you give a math homework. Who's the audience? Well, it's me. Okay, because they know I'm going to grade the paper and all that kind of thing. So I just thought, well, now what if I gave a homework assignment and said, your audience is your high school math teacher, or your audience is your family, or your audience is the folks you're rooming with in the dorm or the apartment, then they would write it differently, right? I mean, if they're writing a solution for me and they know I know math, then they figure I can interpolate between things. I maybe don't have to explain every single step. I can see how they got from A to B to C. But if they're writing it for someone else in the class or a roommate or something like that, then they're probably going to put more detail in. And they're probably going to learn more writing it for that audience than for me. So that's interesting. I'm going to have to try that next time around.